for Racial Reconciliation. And just so happy to see you. So happy that we have a month, a full 31 days to honor our Asian American Pacific Islander brothers and sisters. And so it's just going to be an incredible evening. And like I said, I'm going to just wait a few minutes for some folks to come in. And then once we get a critical mass, we'll go ahead and get started. I will open us up in prayer and then toss it over to the one and only Jen Elrod. So just really looking forward to this evening. So good seeing everyone. I'm gonna change my view so I can see who else is coming in the room. So good to see everybody. So good.
So many familiar faces, which is so exciting. And I'm glad we're doing it in this view.
I know. Hey, Denise. So good seeing you. So good seeing you. Hey, Grace. Grace. Two Graces. Yes.
And they're gracing us with their presence.
Yes. And somebody's with Grace Ng. I see a face leaning over to the camera and a hand wave. Hey, how you doing?
Hey, good. Good to see everyone here.
Good to see you here. Good to see you here. I'll wait one more minute, Jen, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like folks are really popping in now. So good to see everyone. As we're waiting, don't forget, May 21st from 12 to 2, we're having the AAPI community picnic. I had to say that only 5 times when we were recording today. And so it's going to be in Pasadena. It's going to be a great time. You can bring food, or there will be some food trucks there, but you have to register so that we know how much, how many trucks we need to have come. But please come, please join us. It's going to be a good time. It's an opportunity for us non-AAPI folks to get to meet our wonderful fellowship family and others. And I like to say extended family, because a lot of the people who are really committed to the center do not attend fellowship. And that's something that's critically important for me, because this type of work, this type of conversation, or these types of conversations are for everybody and not just for those who attend fellowship. So I'm going to go ahead and open us up in prayer, and then I will toss it over to Jen. So let's look to the Lord in prayer. Father, we just thank you. We thank you so much that you create diversity. We thank you that in the scriptures, there is a theology of solidarity, that there is a theology of unity, that there's a theology of harmony, and that it's more than a theology, it's a discipline that you want us to practice every single day. Lord, we pray that you would help us to die daily to our racist ideas, that we would die daily to our biases, that we would die daily to our bigotry, and that we would die daily to our racism. And so, Father, I pray that you will bless this time, bless the panelists, bless everyone who is here. We ask that this will be an incredibly powerful evening, an opportunity for us to learn more, and more important, an opportunity for us to engage and to act as one body and act in solidarity. And we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Again, for those who just joined and don't know who I am, I'm John Williams, the director for the Fellowship Center for Racial Reconciliation. The center is hosting this event this evening, but we could not have done it without so many wonderful, wonderful folks who are so passionate about this issue. And for the center, it's important for us to create and to, more importantly, curate spaces for these kind of dialogues, for this type of learning, for this type of engagement. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Jen Elrod, who will take over the rest of the evening. God bless all of you guys. I'm staying to listen and to learn, but I will definitely be in the background, just praying for you guys and praying for this evening. Thanks.
Thanks so much, John. Again, welcome so much to our conversation and panel discussion called Visibility in Multi-Ethnic Spaces. It has been our vision, for the last year with the center to really create a space specifically for AAPI people, but also to continue to learn and grow from one another. Last May was the first time we really had our first large Zoom gathering in this space, talking about the Atlanta shootings and just the impact. We had a space of lament, we've had panel discussions. And so tonight is really about shedding light to what does it mean to create visibility in multi-ethnic spaces. So we have some really amazing panelists tonight. I will introduce each of them as they speak, but we're just looking forward to tonight to hearing from each of our speakers. And then if you have questions that come up as we go along, feel free to throw those in the chat. We'll have a question and answer portion at the end. But thank you so much just for joining us tonight and creating this space for us. So I'm really excited for all that we have to offer you and all that our speakers have to share. So our first panelist for this evening is Dr. Michelle Reyes. She is the Vice President of the Asian American Christian Collaborative and a scholar in residence at Hope Community Church. She is the author of Becoming All Things: How Small Changes Lead to Lasting Connections Across Cultures, and has another upcoming book called Racewise: Family, 10 postures becoming households of healing and hope. Dr. Reyes has contributed to several book chapters in The Jesus I Wish I Knew in High School and Take Heart, 100 Devotions to Seeing God When Life's Not Okay. She serves on the board for Redbud Writers Guild and is a writing fellow for the Missio Alliance and a regular contributor to Encourage and Think Christian. Her writing in faith and culture can be found in many other publications. She has amazing content on social media as well, and offers and breeds a really safe space for conversation, as well as she has written in Christianity Today, Pathos, and Faithfully Magazine. She lives in Austin, Texas, so we're so thankful she's joining us tonight with the time difference. But she is married. Her pastor is a husband, and she has 2 amazing kids, and you can absolutely connect with her at michelleamireyes.com and follow her on Instagram as well. But Michelle, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me. It's a joy to be here.
We are so thankful to have you. I've been fangirling, following you since the Asian American Christian Collaborative was created, and just you guys have done so much. So can you tell us a little bit about AACC and why it was created and kind of the vision and direction that y'all are headed with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the Asian American Christian Collaborative was founded in March 2020 in the midst of rising anti-Asian racism. And, my colleague, the president of AACC, Raymond Chang, both of us were just talking about mutual friends, people that we knew around the country who were raising their voices, Asian Americans who were raising their voices about the hate they were experiencing or witnessing in their community, and no one was treating it seriously, not even in the church. And, I think what came to a head was starting to hear stories from Asian American Christians that in their own churches were being called snowflakes for bringing up anti-Asian hate or being dismissed or even made fun of. And so we knew we had to do something, and it was time for a change. And so Ray and I co-wrote the statement on anti-Asian racism in the time of COVID-19, along with a team of drafters, and that was in March 2020. And with that statement, AACC was born. And within a month, the statement had over 10,000 signatures, and it helped begin to move the needle in conversations about racism, especially within the church. And we were in the statement, we were calling for pastors to preach against racism of all forms, including anti-Asian racism from the pulpit. And we began seeing pastors do just that. And so the mission at AACC is to encourage, equip, empower Asian American Christians and friends of the community to follow Christ holistically. And we accomplish this through 3 core values, through advocacy, community, and education. And I think one of the unique things about the AACC is that we're not just a content creator. So we certainly have content channels like our Reclaim publication, our Reclaim podcast that's co-hosted by Ray and myself, but we're active on the ground, and we're passionate about equipping Asian American Christians to get out into the streets of their community to live out their faith fully. And so two events I just wanted to highlight real quickly was the first in the summer of 2020, right after the murder of George Floyd, we organized what's now become a historic march called Asian Americans for Black Lives and Dignity. Somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000 people showed up for, and mostly Asian American and African Americans, to march from Chinatown to Charlie Date's Progressive Church in Chicago. And then last year, after the Atlanta shooting, on March 16th, 2021, in which 6 Asian women were killed, we partnered and collaborated with different churches and organizations to organize 14 prayer rallies in 14 different cities. And that was a really special moment. It was a sad moment to be brought together because of such grief and such tragedy. But I don't think we've ever seen a collective Asian American movement like that before, where AAPI Christians publicly raise their voices in commitment to their faith and in the pursuit of justice in this country. And I think that's what really draws people to AACC. People tell us all the time that they've longed for a place where Asian Americans can be equipped, can be seen, can be heard, can be valued. And so I think AACC creates that space. And through the work of AACC, people are realizing there's more work to be done, whether it comes to inviting Asians to have seats at the table, to see Asian history as American history, and to address anti-Asian hate in all its forms. So we still have a long way to go, but that is the passion and commitment of AACC, to continue to amplify voices, issues, and histories of Asian Americans in the church, and to continue to push that needle forward in including Asians and the lived experiences of Asians in our conversations.
That's so beautiful. I feel like I already see John's wheels turning of how we're going to continue to partner with y'all, because I know you guys haven't officially gotten to meet yet. But I think what was so beautiful, I think what was so beautiful about the statement that you created, it was one of the first statements I think that we saw anyone taking a stance and creating a voice of the significance of why we needed to stand up and why we needed to say something. And so I hope that you follow Michelle's podcast if you are a podcaster, which I feel like a lot of you are. I think a lot of us became podcasters in pandemic. But I think a lot of what you talked about too plays into a little bit of breaking the stereotype of the model minority myth and the perpetual foreigner. Can you talk a little bit about that and why it's so significant to create this space, and kind of maybe some outcomes that you've seen out of that space as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you just highlighted, these are the two stereotypes that plague the Asian American community. The model minority myth is this idea that somehow magically, Asian Americans are racially smarter and racially more successful than any other ethnic minority group. And then the second is the perpetual foreigner, which basically goes that even if you were born in this country, even if you're like a 5th, 6th, 7th generation Asian American, people still think you were born elsewhere. You're not seen as fully American. And so that question of like, where are you from? And then I say, oh, I'm from Minnesota. And then people say, no, where are you really from? Like they want to know, like, aren't you from India? I'm like, no, I'm from Minnesota. I'm from South Carolina, where I was born. And you can still see that look of confusion, because for some people, they just can't understand that we were born here. Yeah. And so I think what that leads to is that in times of stability, Asians, because of the first myth, the model minority myth, we're seen as safe in times of stability because we're assumed to be rich, we're assumed to be successful, we're assumed to be white proximate, if you will. So we're the safe ethnic minority neighbor in times of stability. But then what we've seen is that in times of instability, in times of the pandemic, for example, in the words of Dr. Song Chan Rao, we go from pet to threat. And all of a sudden, then we are the scapegoats. We are the boogeymans, if you will, to then take the blame for whatever American society is suffering through. Hence the language of, the Chinese virus and Chinese people, and by extension Asian people, being told to go home and fill in the blank. And so these two stereotypes prevent, and you know what's interesting is that Baines and Company just put out some research about how only 16% of Asian men and only 20% of Asian women feel included in the workplace. And I think these sorts of stereotypes play into those feelings for Asian Americans, that people think, oh, you're successful, you must not experience racism, or you must not go through that many difficulties. And because of that, it's hard to raise our voice and self-advocate because no one else believes that we have any struggles. And so I think there's a lot of, we need to deconstruct and break and bust those myths so that we can actually have space to talk about the struggles of the Asian American demographic. But at the same time, that myth, the model minority myth, it was created in the 60s, height of the civil rights movement, right after immigration laws had changed, and there was this new wave of Asian immigrants coming to the US to pit Asian Americans against African Americans. And it was created by a white journalist. You can Google it and see the article where he tries to make the argument that that Asian Americans are, you know, they came to this country with, you know, no money in their suitcases, just the clothes on their back, and look how successful they are, and kind of pointing a finger to the African Americans. See, why can't you be like the Asians? Why can't you be successful like them? And therefore, if you're not, then the blame is on yourself. And so there's real racial foundations, racialized foundations, and racial complications with living into that. And so even people who are like, well, isn't it a compliment to say you're smart? Like, isn't it a compliment to say, hey, you know, you're good at math because you're Asian? And it's like, well, no, because the reasons for those statements in the first place were to pit Asians and African Americans, Asians and Latinos against each other. And so we need to kind of stare that history in the face and deconstruct it for that reason as well.
Wow, that's so powerful. And I think you just talked about so much of like knowing and understanding history, because Asian American history is history. And even with your comment on stability, a lot of what may feel like stability is Asian Americans assimilating to the dominant culture. And so, you know, our theme tonight is talking about visibility in multi-ethnic spaces. So what would you say is so significant about creating visibility, and just what does solidarity look like for those to partner with AACC, or for those to partner with their Asian American brothers and sisters, whether in the church or in the workplace?
Yeah, definitely. Well, you know, I think at its core, gospel-rooted racial solidarity means showing up and standing up for a person or group whose plight might not appear to have anything to do with our own initially. In other words, it means treating each other like family and caring enough to put your family's interests above your own. And I like to go to Galatians 3:26 through 28, because I think that passage forms a powerful basis for racial solidarity within scripture, because when the Apostle Paul says there's neither Jew nor Greek, neither male nor female, slave nor free, we're all one in Christ Jesus, he's arguing that there should be this oneness, this solidarity expressed across different people groups. And quite simply, what that means today is that our racialized experiences, particularly as followers of Jesus, should not insulate us from each other, right? A man should care about the pains and struggles that a woman has. An African American should care about the pains and struggles that a Latino has. An Anglo-American should care about the pains and struggles that an Asian American has, and so on. And so as followers of Jesus, we have to intentionally declare that the Black Christians and Latino Christians, if they are on the other side of town from us, they're our brothers and sisters, and so we're going to show up for them, or intentionally and verbally declare that Asian Americans and Native Americans, you know, on the north side or the east side, that they're our brothers and sisters too. And so we may not be physically proximate to each other, but as a family under the banner of Christ, we have an obligation of moral proximity, if you will, to each other, to physically and spiritually care for each other. So when you're my brother or when you're my sister, I will show up and stand up next to you when you're hurting, right? Like, your pain is my pain too. And so I think one of the immediate practical applications for that today is to move beyond the Black-white racial divide, in which people treat issues of race as nothing more than issues between Black people and white people, because what that ends up doing, intentionally or unintentionally, is making the lived realities of Asian Americans and Latinos as invisible, as well as Native Americans and mixed folk. And so we need to care about and show up for the injustice plaguing the Asian American and Latino communities as much as we care for and show up for the injustices plaguing the Black community, and vice versa. And this can include acknowledging these pain points on Sunday mornings from the pulpit, making space for communal lament for different ethnic groups, giving financially to and supporting Asian, Latino, Black, Native, mixed locals and businesses, equally attending marches and protests for each other. But I'll say this: solidarity will not be possible if we cannot fully see and acknowledge each other, right? Like, we're all hurting in different ways. All of our communities are hurting in different ways. The Asian community is hurting differently than the Black community. And we need to make space for each other's pains. And we need to also be able to say to each other, my grief is different from yours, and I will not compare the two. Because if we're truly committed to solidarity, we don't fall into the trapping of telling Asians, for example, that they're taking up too much space when they publicly express lament. To be committed to solidarity is to not be a gatekeeper to how much a person is allowed to advocate for their own community or ethnic group. So instead, we need to lean in and respond by saying, I'm sorry, I'm listening, how can I help? And I think if each of us are doing that, that is going to be a powerful expression for the body of Christ in unity, and a powerful expression of worship to the Lord.
That is so beautiful. I'm sorry, I'm listening, how can I help? That is so powerful. I have chills just because everything you're saying is, first of all, so in line with the themes we talked about at the center. There's going to be a great connection with you after, but just so profound. You've done the research, you've done the work, you're leading out in your own church in such powerful ways. And it's really beautiful. What does visibility look like for you specifically in this month? I know you've had some content posted on social media about what does it look like to bring light and visibility to AAPI voices without making sure that we're tokenizing Asian American voices. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think one is just the educational piece. There's studies that show that somewhere around the 40% of white Americans don't even know about the Asian hate that's happening in our country, which is crazy because the Stop AAPI Hate Center has now recorded just over 2 years, over 11,000 incidents of Asian hate crimes, majority of which have been against Asian women. And yet I think this I can't say the word statistic is so disheartening, but it's true, because almost every time that I speak up about another Asian woman that's been attacked or another Asian man that's been attacked, I do have some white friends who'll reach out and be like, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. And it's this realization of like, okay, we're not watching the same news channels, like we're not following the same news feeds. A lot of non-Asians have no idea what's happening within the Asian community. And so I think we have to start there. We have to be in the know, find out what's happening. If you're not an Asian, find out what's happening in the Asian community, follow Asian news sources, particularly if you're a Christian leader, so that if a tragedy rips through an Asian community, you are ready and prepared to address that on a Sunday morning or with your organization, or to offer care to your staff who is going to be hurting. And the last thing you want is to be completely ignorant of that. So there's a big educational piece that needs to take place. And to your point, it needs to be done in relationship, right? It needs to be done walking alongside of, say, a fellow Asian neighbor or congregant or coworker, where you're eating lunch together, you're having conversations over the dinner table, you're going to their home, eating their food, just enjoying them for who they are as a whole person, right? Like, their favorite music, what they're listening to on Spotify, or their latest show on TV. Like, are they a Marvel fan, right? Like, do they play soccer? And then when a racial tragedy hits, you're reaching out. Hey, can I get you some food? Hey, do you need anything? Hey, I'm so sorry. I heard what happened. I'm grieving with you. I'm in the trenches with you. So if we can pair education with real relationships, that's what's going to help us move beyond tokenism.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Michelle. Real quick, can you give everyone the name of your podcast and then the name of your 2 books that you have? Because I want to make sure, and we can drop the links in the chat for you as well. But I want to make sure that we are supporting you in the hard work that you do and just learning from you. I think you have provided such a beautiful space for us this evening to continue to learn and grow together.
Oh, thank you. Well, the name of our podcast is the AACC Reclaim Podcast. So every season, we are talking about something that Asian American Christians can work on reclaiming. And so season 3 just dropped last week, beginning of May, on reclaiming Asian American Christian leadership. So this entire season will be about what is Asian American Christian leadership, how do we reclaim it, what are healthy models in the church and the corporate world, Gen Z and beyond. My first book, which came out last year, is called Becoming All Things: How Small Changes Lead to Lasting Connections Across Cultures. The foundation for that is 1 Corinthians 9, where the Apostle Paul says, I became all things to all people. So that's the nod in my title, Becoming All Things. And then my second book, which is co-authored by my wonderful friend Helen Lee, is called The Race-Wise Family. Let's see here. I have a copy right here, so you can see the beautiful cover. And the subtitle is 10 Postures to Becoming Households of Healing and Hope. That releases next Tuesday, May 17th. And it's a practical handbook for Christian parents to just be able to guide their children in asking God for help in unpacking racial issues together.
I feel a book club coming on for the parents, and maybe we can have you back as a guest speaker. But thank you so much, Michelle, Dr. Reyes. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And if you can, stick around for a little bit for questions at the end. We would love to have you if any of those questions come in. Again, reminder to put questions you have that we'll answer in a little bit in the chat. But I am going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Nam An Johnson. She was born in Vietnam and moved here as a child. She is a Bible scholar and an experienced success manager in the tech industry, while also being a speaking travel pastor. She is a lover of people and food, and she has beautiful life analogies that she is turning into a book for her daughters. I might have her drop some of the titles for you later, but she is actually based out of Bellingham, Washington. Nam An has been a guest speaker for several of our table talks. She is a great teacher of the word and a personal dear friend of mine. She and her husband have 2 daughters whom they call their tiny typhoons, and 2 pups as well. She is a phenomenal cook and activist. You will leave time spent with her feeling seen, fed, full of food, full of joy and laughter, and probably receive some Korean skincare tips. Yes. But please, please welcome Nam An Johnson to the Zoom stage. See, already so much joy and laughter. We're so happy to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'd love to first tell people to follow you on social media, on Johnson 0724. Is that right?
I just changed it to Nam An Johnson, I think.
Yay, okay. Well, why don't you tell, so part of the conversation tonight is talking about what does it mean to come home to yourself. But I want to start off with, you recently posted on social media, part of coming home to yourself is choosing to go by your birth name. So can you share a little bit with us about that journey and how to pronounce it and what that journey has been like for you and kind of the history of that?
Absolutely. So my name is Nam An, and it is my Vietnamese name. And so it is my name. I don't need to clarify that it's my Vietnamese name. I immigrated to America with my mom and my 3 older siblings when I was about 2 and a half. And being a child of an immigrant mother, there was a huge push for all the children to learn English quickly and to assimilate quickly, really at the cost of survival and translation and success. Because even my mom as an immigrant was already inundated with ideas that white proximity meant safety. And so it was very important for her that we were safe. And so when I started going to school, I mean, up until public education, I was called Naman. That was the name that my family called me by. But when I went to school, I didn't know how to speak English. And so my teacher at the time shot her shot and called me on. And because I didn't speak English, I couldn't correct her. And so her mistake became my name identity. And over the last couple of years, I've really gone through a journey with the Lord of coming home and unpacking what that means. And recently, a close friend asked me, is coming home, is there like a final destination? Is home the final destination? And to be honest, coming home, there are destinations that can happen multiple times a day, every other day, whatever that looks like, whatever the Lord wants to do of what that home destination is, I want my heart to be ready to receive it. And so in that conversation with her, I just said, you know, only my husband and my mom call me by my real name. And that night, you know, because marketing really works, I watched a Procter and Gamble commercial about a Korean mom naming her daughter this beautifully unique name. And she walks through this journey with her daughter about how some people just won't accept you. But there will be people who do. And I'm like sobbing, thinking, marketing works every time. Whatever Procter and Gamble product, I want it. But I also left with this message of there is so much beauty in our name. And I think in Christian circles, we talk about that a lot. Yet here I am as a pastor, recognizing that I don't even have the expectation that people would know my name, say my name, and call me by my name. And so I made a social media post, as one does when they come into this huge milestone in their life. I made it IG reel. I hope some of you are picking up on my humor because this is all silent muted mics right now, but I made an IG reel and I just shared my Vietnamese name, and that was coming home. That was the destination for the day. But even here's the thing about coming home. Home can also be a place of immense trauma. And so I came home. My destination was like, I would like to be called Naman. And to come home to myself and my identity in the way that God has made me is also being willing to take up space. And for me, taking up space in any arena, I also work at a tech company, is to be able to say, my name is Naman. You cannot please do not call me nicknames that you have found to be endearing, but please learn how to say my name. Because if you can say Timothy Chalamet, I think that you can say Naman. And so reclaiming coming home was saying, this is my name, and it is not too much for me to expect that you would know my name because God calls me by name. But the place of trauma is I didn't realize until the next day that I had so much trauma from my childhood as an immigrant, where so many people made fun of my wrong name. So I couldn't even imagine what they would say about my real name. And I actually had an experience a couple days later where I introduced myself to an adult, like dad, at my kid's birthday party, friend's birthday party. And I said, hi, my name is Naman. And he immediately made fun of my name. And in that moment, I transported back to like 6-year-old on, who quietly cried because I didn't know how to speak English. I didn't have friends. I didn't know how, and I just got made fun of all the time. And so while there is beauty in coming home, there also, and a willingness to go there with the Lord, there's also, there has to be a willingness to face the trauma of what home can hold.
That's so beautiful. And we've had extensive conversations about trauma and what it means to come home to oneself. What are some other ways that you have journeyed not just with your name, but you've been on this long journey of what it means to come home to yourself and your identity, not just as a woman, not as just as an Asian American woman, but even you are an Asian American woman that is a pastor in ministry, but also balancing life in the tech world. So kind of talk a little bit about what it means to come home to yourself and just what it means to be a woman in ministry and the significance of that.
Yeah. Oh, loaded question. I like that you started it off with, we talk a lot about trauma. Jen and I always also talk about other things, if anybody was
We
curious.
eat a lot of good food while we talk
eat
about
a lot of
trauma.
food while we talk about drama. But I honestly, a lot of that, like as an Asian American woman, as an immigrant, as a pastor, in all these arenas where, like in tech, Asian women are the least likely to be promoted into any roles of leadership. That you'll see a lot of Asian women in tech spaces, but never in positions of people management. The survey that Michelle referred to, where the percentage of Asian Americans who feel excluded at work, you know, in that space, and then in the ministry space, in the church space, still the theological conversation about whether or not women are called by God to preach the gospel and to be pastors. I feel like a part of my story and experience and growth with the Lord is being placed into spaces that were not made for me. And a decision that I've had to make as a young woman was, if you don't want me at your table, I don't want to be at your table, I will go build my own. Because when you have to fit and mold yourself to fit in for a spot at the table, a lot of that comes with compromise and dishonoring into the way that God has made you. So every space that I've walked in as an immigrant to America, as an Asian woman in tech, as an Asian woman with tattoos and piercings in the North Evangelical Church, I recognize that my presence can make people uncomfortable because I don't fit into the mold that they want me to fit in. But I don't want to dishonor myself. I don't want to compromise my integrity of what God has called me to do. And I think a younger me would just want opportunity and would be willing, you know, as an Asian woman, I didn't get a lot of opportunities to teach. So I would be willing to fit into a mold so that I could become acceptable, so that I could just get opportunities. And I think in the journey, I know in the journey of coming home, I've had to just really be like, screw it. If you don't want me, I don't want to be there. And in every space that does not desire for me to thrive, it means that there are other spaces for me to thrive. So either I can waste my time trying to like elbow myself to the table into a space that doesn't even want me there, or I can just go find other spaces. And I think scarcity mindset would make people of color believe that there aren't spaces for us. So we have to compromise our integrity and dishonor ourselves as image bearers to be in those spaces. But honestly, like, life is too short and ain't nobody got time for that. like reclaiming is, there are so many spaces for us.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to build it, but there are spaces where we don't have to compromise ourselves.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And even I think, as you talk about not just scarcity mindset, but imposter syndrome. How many times do we show up in a space and like, I think you and I were both like, oh my gosh, Dr. Michelle Reyes is gonna be here. I was
so nervous. I had an upset stomach. I was like, I'm sitting at the big kids table.
But like the significance of like, there are beautiful spaces for us to sit at and be, and that God has created for us. And like you said, like, if you're not going to make room for me at this table, I'm going to go sit at another table and I'm going to invite other people to that table, and the significance of that and the beauty of that. You have this beautiful storytelling analogy that I would love for you to talk about. But first, tell us a little bit about this book that you are putting together to gift to your daughters, and just the significance of how you're raising them why you call them your tiny typhoons, and just maybe even a teensy bit about kind of even your kitchen protocol of what they're learning about and creating that space for them to grow into.
Absolutely. I have two amazing daughters. I call them my tiny typhoons because you will always hear them, feel them, and see them coming. And sometimes they're just going to wreck you, and it's fine. They're 8 and 9. That's why there's only 2. And honestly, I never wanted to be a mother. I had a deep fear of motherhood because of the trauma, neglect, and abuse that I experienced in my own relationship. And I never wanted, and if I was going to be a mom, I did not want to be a mother to girls. And so the Lord was like, watch me. And so I am a mother to 2 strong, intelligent, bold, kind, empathetic little women. And I'm raising them like their husband, that's weird. My husband, their father is white, and I am Vietnamese, and we had completely different upbringings, and we are raising our girls on how, as biracial children, how do you recognize that you are wholly both? You know, talking to, oh, Jen, I might cry. Talking to incredibly strong, wonderful, powerful friends who are biracial, multiracial, multi-ethnic, and so forth. A huge conversation piece is how they were always made to feel like they were not either Asian enough or not white enough, and they didn't belong in either space. And so raising my girls, I want them to recognize that they can be wholly both, that they can enter into our Vietnamese culture being wholly Vietnamese, and they can enter into their father's culture, the American culture, the white culture, and so forth, and be wholly there, like there too, that God did not make a mistake, and they bear this burden, this beautiful burden, that they get to do both. That while my kids get to do incredible things and experience amazing Vietnamese cuisine and our culture and everything, they get to do both. And it's a burden because not everyone will understand, and not everyone will allow them into those spaces. And then they get to say, if you don't want me there, I don't want to be there. And so that, raising my girls and going through this journey of coming home, I began to just write down letters to my daughters. And, you know, I'm a woman of one-liners, and because it helps my children remember. So
Yeah.
like you got to potty before you party. The importance of preparation before you leave the home. The higher the pants, the higher the confidence. You just got to yank your pants up real high. Like mine is practically like to my armpits right now. Just like all these things where, oh, I'm your mother, I'm not your maid. Just a lot of life lessons that I want to impart on my daughters, and maybe, God willing, other women who have journeyed and have never had a motherly voice. So I'm just compiling that. I plan on working on it for a year and just releasing the letters that I have, really to my daughters and to other daughters, and honestly to myself as a daughter.
So beautiful. Well, as we close out our time here, I'd love for you to kind of share, we've talked about storytelling and what it means to create our own tables, what it means to not be welcomed at certain tables. And so you have this really beautiful analogy about what it means to share and give your story to other people.
Yeah.
Can you kind of end us with that?
Absolutely. I want you to think about a baby. And if you ever held a baby, if somebody let you hold their baby, this is a sign of trust. Like they are trusting that you are not going to drop their baby, harm you. You are trusted. You're being entrusted with something that is precious and vulnerable and beautiful. Because that's what you like. Give me a visual signal that you understand what I'm holding. Like you take someone's baby, yeah, and it's just tender. And now I want you to think about people's stories like babies. That when you are given someone's story, especially of racial trauma, the same posture in which you receive that story, that baby, is to be one of tenderness and care. If a mother hands you her baby, you're not like, prove to me that this is your child. Show me your war wounds. Like you like, we might be laughing like, that's ridiculous. We would never do that. But we do that with people's stories, especially of racial trauma. Well, prove to me that you know that's racism. Okay, Becky, like, you know what I mean? And so I want you to visualize stories as babies. And I want you to also, if you are a story giver, there's two postures in which someone can there's two postures in which someone can approach your story. And that's the posture of humility, which is receiving it with care and vulnerability and a tenderness. And then there's a posture of demand. And you don't have to give anybody your story. Just like I would not feel inclined to feel like I have to give anybody access to my children, my babies. I would protect it and I would give it to people that I trust. And I think a part of coming home and reclaiming our space in the kingdom of God is realizing we don't have to give when people are demanding of us, but just like our stories, just like babies, just like our experiences, we get to honor ourselves, and we get to say, you don't get that from me today, or if ever. And they have to earn it with a posture of humility. So just like you think how crazy it would be to hand someone your baby and they not care for it, that's your story. And just like how crazy it would be to have somebody hand you their baby and you wouldn't care for it well, that's your story. That's their story. And to honor oneself and to honor others is to take it and hold it and recognize it is an honor to hold stories.
That is so beautiful. It has been an honor to be with you in this space, an honor to storytell with you. Naman and I got to meet in a trauma group actually called Healing Spaces last year, and we've been Zoom friends since then, and got to meet like a month and a half ago for the first time. And so it's been a beautiful, joyous time together. Thank you so much for your time. We actually have a couple of questions that came in the chat that we'll ask during our question and answer portion. So feel free to take a peek at those and we'll jump back to them. But our next guest speaker is a familiar face to the Center of Racial Reconciliation as well as Fellowship Church. Our next speaker is Pastor Michael Lee. Pastor Michael Lee was born in South Korea and lived in Argentina before moving to the US, where he grew up in the Seattle area where he now resides. His ministry experience spans 3 decades as a church planter, pastor, and a professor, both in LA and Seattle. He has his doctorate of ministry from Gordon Cornell. He enjoys good coffee, hiking, and fishing. And I personally think he is the king of dad jokes. He is married to his best friend Mink, and they have 3 young adult children they are planning to add to their family by becoming foster parents in the near future. His family goal is to be the same person he is at home as he is in public. So please join me in welcoming Pastor Michael Lee.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all.
Pastor Michael, so good to see you in this space. We got to have lunch when I was visiting in Seattle last month. And so I was very excited when we had a space open on the panel. I was like, let's ask Michael Lee. And so John beat me to the punch of texting you because we love and miss you here with the Center for Racial Reconciliation and with Fellowship Family. So someone said Robert says he's my dad joke hero. I agree. His dad jokes are spot on. Maybe we'll be graced with 1 or 2 snuck in there. But Pastor Michael, it's been a while since you have been with us, a year in the Zoom space, but it's been a while since you've been with the Fellowship Family. What are you up to now? Where are you? Kind of tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me here. And by the way, before we go any further, Jason Chu, I don't know if we've met, but can you teach me how to dress the next time I'm on one of these things? Because you look so cool and I look like a nerd, right? But I think the difference is a beanie. A beanie can make any nerd look cool. So that's just a note for the next time. But thanks for having me. So since my time at Fellowship, which I still hold so deeply and closely in my heart, I've moved to the Seattle area. And for the last little over 2 years, I've been pastoring a church here called Encounter Church. We just changed the name on Easter Sundays, but previous to that, it was called All Nations Community Church. And so I arrived in February 2020. And then in March 2020, we went into lockdown. So after a month, we went in pandemic mode for the next, year and a half or so. And we really relaunched just in earnest this past September. And so I feel like, I'm still just kind of getting out of the starting gate. But one of the things that we are doing or attempting to do is to transition our almost exclusive Asian American space, right, to a more ethnically diverse space. And so that has been quite, it's a work in progress. I'm very hopeful, but it's taking a lot of effort. I reached out to some of my white pastor friends and, try to strike a deal. Hey, I'll trade you 20 of my Asian folks for 20 of your white folks. Why don't we just expedite this process, help each other out? And they all said no. And so now I have to do it the hard way. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And so that's one of my big things. And so, I'll kind of focus on that, Jen, but if we have time, I would love to, as time permits, talk about like the uniqueness of this current predominantly Asian American congregation in our attempt to tangibly express the gospel by fighting injustice, because that's a pretty rare combination. Absolutely. For a demographics that's predominantly Asian to, for example, have a racial justice ministry, emphasis on gender equality, even taking up topics like environmental justice and things of that sort. And so that's also been a real kind of a tricky thing to navigate through. But I could talk a little bit about the transitioning the predominant Asian American space into a more diverse space. Yeah,
absolutely. I think, when we sat and had lunch together when I was in Seattle a couple of weeks ago, I was like, your church is great. The music is great. Obviously, you're the lead pastor and that's wonderful. But I was like, your name's All Nations. And I just saw a ton of Asian people. And then you laid out this beautiful story that like is one of those stories where it's like, but God, like you were asked to be a part of this church and you really like grace of God, strength of God have really transformed the vision and the direction. And I think personally, like, I always check out friends' churches and visit their websites and are wondering like, how diverse our church is. I think the world of Fellowship. And so even visiting your church website, one of the first things that's listed is justice. And I know that you guys have a strong emphasis on the foster care systems and what it means to step into that. You and Mink have chosen to step into that yourself. But I would love for you to talk a little bit what that change and that transition has been like to be a predominantly Asian Korean American church and transitioning to what it means to become more multi-ethnic.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. By the way, you mentioned the name, and I'm not joking. When I was in the kind of the, I guess, when we were dating each other, right, with the church, I did bring that up. And I said, we are like the king of misnomers for this almost exclusive Asian congregation to be called All Nations. So I was only half joking when I said, we need to either change our name or, entirely, or change it to All One Nation, right? Because anyway,
probably didn't like that one.
I can tell you're laughing. I just can't hear it because you're all muted. But anyway, so let me just start by, sharing why this transition from a almost exclusive Asian American congregation to a more multi-ethnic congregation. And it really is a kingdom purpose. Our mission is to make disciples who love Jesus, live like Jesus, and lead others to Jesus. And that last piece, lead others to Jesus, I think what that means in part is we have to remove any barriers to anyone being able to come to Encounter Church just as they are and be able to take a step towards Jesus. But one of the things I realized is that oftentimes, if a congregation is monoethnic, that's a huge barrier to a person, not only within the church inviting someone who doesn't look like them, but also someone on the receiving end of that invitation coming to an almost exclusive monoethnic context. And so there's barriers on both sides. And I experienced this when I was pastoring a church in LA before fellowship called Yongnak Celebration Church, very similar in demographics to my current church, but with no, the church leadership had no aspirations to be multi-ethnic. But I remember like reaching out to my non-Asian friends and inviting them to come to church with me, right? And then when they learned that it was almost entirely Korean Americans, there was a great hesitancy. So it was really difficult to even get non-Asians to the church. And once they got there, very few ever came back because it was just too uncomfortable. And so I didn't want that for my church, coming back to Seattle. And so it really is a kingdom-minded purpose for doing this, right? So we could be the Revelation 7 type church, because in heaven, there's not going to be like a Latino section, an Asian section, a Black section, a white section, right? I mean, we're all going to be together. And so I wanted to do that. And also at my time at fellowship, like really enriched that desire in me to have a congregation that was ethnically diverse. But as we have been moving towards that, there have been a number of things that I've been running up against. And I wanted to share those, what those things were. First, and this was, I had anticipated it, but to actually hear it, it kind of took me back. So the first thing I ran up against in this transition from monoethnic towards multi-ethnicity is the sense of loss that some people within the church communicated, right? They were fearful that the church would lose its Asianness, that the church would lose its Koreanness, that what brought comfort, what brought peace, what brought familiarity to them would be lost if other people who didn't look like them began to take a seat at the table, right? And I think I deeply understand that, especially when you consider the history of Encounter Church. It was born out of an immigrant Korean church where, the immigrants came and the parents, they spoke only Korean, culture was only Korean, the language was Korean, and so on and so forth. And so, that was like that safe place where people who spoke the same language, had a common culture, congregated. And so it was much more than just a religious center. It was a cultural center. It was a cultural hub. And so out of that was born children who grew up, became Westernized, spoke English as the primary language, and now was independent, right? And so kind of the lineage of All Nations Community Church before it became Encounter was that. And so to lose that heritage, if you will, there was this deep sense of loss. And so, so that was something that I wanted to name, that in any time there is a shift, even if it's a shift for all the right reason, there can be this incredible sense of loss, that something is changing, that something that, they valued and actually drew them perhaps to that place was going to change, right? And so a sense of loss by the congregation was one of the challenges I have faced. Another one was just hesitancy on the part of the majority to be the minority. Right? Hesitancy on the part of the majority to be the minority. What I mean by that is I talked with a number of people and asked, hey, are you going to invite non-Asians to, like the Easter service or to our relaunch service? And I think a number of people, some of them, they just, weren't into that for whatever reason. But there were a number of people I talked to who sincerely wanted to use this as an opportunity to invite unchurched non-Asians to Encounter Church to, hear the gospel of Christ. But there was a lot of hesitancy on the part of, for instance, white friends, white neighbors, white, co-workers they invited, because once they heard that the demographics of the church was predominantly Asian, there was this hesitancy. And so, not only was there a challenge of this sense of loss by the congregation members, there was also the hesitancy on the part of, people in the majority culture stepping into and becoming a minority in a different kind of ethnic context. And so, I do feel like that's something that, maybe people outside the ethnic church, something to think about, right? Because that's my life experience, right? If I didn't step into a space where I was the minority, where would I go shopping? Where would I, have gone to elementary school or junior high school or high school? Where would I have gone to get my teeth cleaned? And so, but that is something that I experienced, or at least people have testified, that just hesitancy of the majority to be the minority. And then the third one, and this is something that actually grieved me so much so that I actually had to reach out to John Williams for some counsel. The third challenge is perceived hostility or threat that a predominantly Asian space can pose. Okay, a perceived hostility or threat that a predominantly Asian space can pose. So, when I wanted to make my church, as I'm wanting to make my congregation more ethnically diverse, which means bringing people who don't look like me into the group, I had not considered the potential threat or, the perceived hostility that being amongst so many Asians can pose for some people outside of my ethnic or racial grouping. For instance, let me give you a very specific example. We were in the process of hiring a full-time pastor. It was a combination of youth and justice ministry pastor. And there was this wonderful applicant, an African-American pastor from the East Coast who applied. And I was just so happy about that, right? Because I know about the tension between Koreans and Blacks, especially having lived in LA, right? That tension is real. And so I thought, wow, we could be a breaker of this barrier, right? And how wonderful would that be? And so I talked to this pastor, and he's just an amazing guy, young, but he had so many stories to tell, being a Black man in America, right? And just the hardship of that. And, as a youth pastor, I couldn't imagine someone I would want more to be a pastor to my own son. And so we were talking and things were going really great. And then just kind of in the vetting process, I did what I did with any other candidate. I ran a background check. I followed up on messages and podcasts that the person had, said. And there were just a couple things that had come up that I thought were like harmless, but because it came up, I needed to address it, right? Just as part of my due diligence. And so, one of them was on the background check, there was a ding showed up that it seemed related to some traffic violation, but because it wasn't clear, I just needed to ask. And then he had a podcast where he had talked about how Asians have assimilated largely to the white majority, and in the process kind of, continue to support white hegemony, right? Which is true. And then, just made this really quick comment, I just don't get that, right? Now, if I were a Black man in America, I probably wouldn't get it either, right? So I wasn't threatened by that, but I just wanted to make sure that he was still able to advocate for Asians when that kind of advocacy would be needed. And so, just wanted to check up on those couple things. And then so in our conversation, I could tell the tone was a little different. Something was definitely on his mind. And so when I asked him how the process was, he I think he was taken aback that I wanted to talk to a Black man about a background check flag and about something he had said about Asians. And so kind of between the two, he felt like, these were his words, his wife felt like we were laying a trap, right? And so that was really hard for me it broke my heart that he would think I would lay a trap. Why would I do that? That would be the last thing that I would want to do. But then it dawned on me that there is a context that anyone entering into my group, right? There's a context. They're not starting at zero. And I had been completely blind to that. And so just realizing, even in this predominantly Asian space, anyone coming into that space is going to come with certain contexts and certain experiences that will shape his or her perspective of that predominant Asian space, right? And so all this to say, there have been a number of really great lessons learned in this, this journey of transitioning from a mono-ethnic congregation to a multi-ethnic congregation.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Michael. I think so much of what you said, I mean, really points to heaven's going to be diverse, and the significance of that multi-ethnicity is so important. But there are things that are unpacked, and as we sit at the table, we have to stay engaged with it. And unfortunately, that candidate no longer wanted to, and it was no longer a fit. I wish I had a call to youth ministry, because I would move myself up to Seattle in a heartbeat to do that work alongside you. But thank you so much for your time with us this evening, and let's all please continue to pray for Pastor Michael and their church and this transition, and the beauty that is going to be happening, and the beautiful spaces that you're going to create in that multi-ethnic space. So thank you so much, Pastor Michael. Our next and last panelist for this evening is Jason Chu. Jason is a rapper and educator who speaks hope and healing in a broken world. He is a Chinese American kid from suburban Delaware, and he found vocabulary for racial identity and liberation in rap music and hip hop culture. Jason's music has been heard on Warrior, which is on HBO Max, Tetris Beat, which is a part of Apple Arcade. He is a 2022 Artist at Work Fellow at the Japanese American National Museum. He's the communications director at Hate is a Virus, and recently received his M-A-T, I don't know what that is, Master's of Arts in Theology, I'm gonna guess, in Asian American Theology from Fuller Seminary. You can keep in touch with Jason at Jason Chu Music everywhere, and listen to him at jasonchumusic.com. I've had the opportunity to run into Jason a lot. If there is an LA rally or protest happening, I 100% have run into Jason every time. I ran into him this weekend, and we took a selfie and sent it to John. But we are so excited to have Jason here, who also Michael would like some style tips from. But Jason, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Hey, thank you for having me so much. And thank you also to all the other panelists who preceded me. I hate it when, I love it when other panelists are bad, because then it's easy for me to do my job. But y'all made it very difficult for me to say anything of substance and value. So thank you all for helping me have a difficult time for the next 15 minutes.
I am sure you have so much to offer us, Jason. For you, so you are deeply involved in LA and the activism scene of Asian Americans for Black Lives and Black Lives Mattering, and so much of the work that you do is so central to LA. And I'm not even kidding you guys. Every protest that I've gone to in LA where there are predominantly Asians, or it's for Stop AAPI Hate, I have run into Jason every single time. And so what would you say, our topic for you this evening is kind of, what is local activism for those who are LA County based? What does activism look like locally for us as LA residents?
Yeah, so as I've been listening to the other distinguished speakers, and we're talking about this topic of visibility in multi-ethnic spaces, I've been thinking so much about how I've been inspired, right? And I've been thinking about how before we can express solidarity, we have to be solid. And what I mean by that is not this perfectionism complex, right? It's not this, oh, we just stay so internal. No, it's a process and it's a journey, and it's one that we undertake in community. But I think something that's so crucial, and I'll say this, it's very overlooked for marginalized populations, is the value of interiority. What I mean by that, right, is so many of us have grown up learning to look for acceptance from a dominant or mainstream authority voice, right? So rarely are we given spaces for ourselves or for whatever identity is surfacing to the forefront to connect to other identities that feel similarly marginalized. And so as I've been meditating on this question and meditating on the sharing of my peers here and some of what's going on in the chat, I've been thinking about how crucial it is before we throw ourselves into the work, either of quote unquote secular, because I don't believe anything's secular, right? But or quote unquote sacred, because all things are God's. Amen. But whether it's in the public sphere or whether it's in the Christian sphere or in whatever sphere we find ourselves, I think that it's so crucial that we understand the depth of God's contextualized love for us. And that I think is so powerful, because so often, frankly, as I think about multi-ethnicity, I think it can be a blessing and a beautiful thing, and it also can be an incredible burden, right? It can be a burden because often it comes, and I'm definitely not saying always, but I think often it comes from a sense of inadequacy in as Naman was saying, home, right? So often we associate home with trauma, right? We associate home, whether that's Asian names or the smell of Asian food or, the look of dark skin or whatever it is that speaks of home to us, we see that as traumatizing and we want to escape it. And we think that multi-ethnicity, we think that that this can be our escape from home. But the reality is, right, we bring home wherever we go. So we're asking about activism, right? What can we do in LA to be activists? I'd say the first step is, have we started on the journey of healing from home? Or are we going out of our doors to do activism because we're terrified of what we have at home, right? We're seeking to heal others because we actually need that healing for ourselves. And this is something that in my studies and in my experience in church and religious spaces are filled with people who have received healing. It's also filled with broken people, and we're often the same people. But it turns right. Brokenness. The church is a hospital for the hurt and the needing to be healed. Yeah. But what's really dangerous, right, is when we turn and we pretend we're at a place on that journey of healing that we're not yet, right? And so activism, I think so often, the first step to activism is making sure that you're right with yourself and your God and your identity and your people and the other people around you, right? Because I know so many people who throw themselves into justice work because they have a bad relationship with their mom and they feel guilty about their relationship to Asian Americans, and so they go out and they protest and they make reels and they make posts and they make TikToks, but they haven't talked to their mom in a year, or folks who go out and we fight so hard sometimes even for other communities. But it's because we're scared of our own community. We're looking for belonging somewhere. We don't feel like we belong at home. And I believe so much. So what I was taught, at least in my, I don't got the I don't got the fancy degrees. I got the baby degree. You know what I'm saying? I couldn't I couldn't stand that much school. So I did the 96 credits. I didn't go for the big one. But what I've learned in my baby degree of seminary is that spiritual abuse is so easy. And I will say this goes absolutely double for justice. Um, Justice spaces, spiritual spaces, places of intimacy, places of passion, places that come from the heart. It's so easy, and not even wittingly, right? Not even intentionally, consciously causing harm, but it's so easy to find meaning, passion, purpose, and validation in a cause, whether that cause is the name of Jesus Christ, or whether that cause is the name of equity, whether that cause is the name of, all of these are beautiful names, but the first step to activism is, are we operating from a place of insecurity, instability, neediness, or are we overflowing, right? Are we coming from a place of, I know who I am, I'm reconciled with who I am, I'm reconciled with the things that have happened and will continue to happen to me, and they're not fun. Sometimes, there's beauty in heritage and there's pain.
Yeah.
Somebody said in the chat, right? Oh, we got so much trauma that we come to the table with. But there's the people, right, who by the grace of God and by the work that God has granted us to do, being created in God's image, we've started that journey of healing. And so it's the fruits of that journey that we're handing out when we do this justice work, when we do this equity work. And there's those of us who do this to avoid starting on that difficult path, right? And so I think that that's such a crucial piece for me. Anytime we're talking about things this powerful, right? Anytime where I take very, very, very seriously the commandment, right? Do not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And one of the ways that I see us taking the name of good and holy things in vain so often is putting that on as a bumper sticker to a car that don't run right. You dig what I'm saying? I don't know if that was a dad joke, Michael, but that's the aphorism that I got for you. You dig what I'm saying, right? So often, we embark on this, and so I would even whether it's injustice or religious, or ideally, hey, it's the same. These spaces we're going into, multi-ethnicity is something to be taken seriously, right? Operating, moving in these spaces, because when you're in a mono-ethnic space, or when you're in a mono-racial space, at least y'all have some shared trauma and some shared history and some shared common ground. And then, oh boy, when we talk about, geez, and then already you've got men and women, and you've got, and already you've got gendered differences. You've got all the different intersectional identities. You've got wealth and poverty. You've got, straight folks, queer folks. You've got all kinds of different experiences within a monoracial space. And then we enter into these multi-ethnic spaces. And I think that, now we're dealing with twice the trauma, and that's not additive, right? It's multiplicative. Because now all of a sudden we've got so many different sparks flying and different connections and pieces. So as we enter into this good work that, Michael and Naman and Michelle and Jen and John and, all of y'all here, we're in this space, so we're embarking on it, right?
Yeah.
As we do this, I think it's so important. And God bless me, sometimes I'm reactive, God, sometimes, I'm feeling microaggressed against, or I didn't sleep enough, or I drank too much caffeine. And just that extra little edge, when you place it in these spaces, thank God for the grace of God and for
Amen.
the Holy Spirit that saves us, because that love covers over a multitude of sins. But I think that, I don't want to say argue, but I would propose that as we embark on these journeys, whether we call it activism, whether we call creating multi-ethnic church spaces, whatever it does, whenever we're entering into these spaces that can trigger, that can pop off those connections that bring with them trauma or bring with them memories of hurt, knowing that we need that covering, that extra covering of grace, that extra layer of healing and dealing. You know what I'm saying? Healing comes through dealing. It comes through dealing with the past. It comes through dealing with the difficult. That to me is really the ground level, because that at least gives us the self-awareness to be able to go, hey, you know, when I was talking to this person, I was, you know, this was triggered in me. To be able to name that for ourselves. And then, you know, God willing, to be able to name that to others, to trust the others around us enough, to be able to say, I have a very, very good friend. His name is Shin Meng. He's married to a Sarah Shin, who wrote Beyond Colorblind for InterVarsity Press.
Great book.
He's a Korean, incredible book. So Shin and I came up together in New Haven, Connecticut. He tells these stories about how, you know, when he was a kid, Korean American kid in high school, he went to a predominantly Black school and he felt bullied and racially teased. And then he was looking for approval from Black folks. And then later on, when he went into our friend Joshua Williams, my roommate at college, graduate of Yale Divinity School, he runs a vineyard church that's multi-ethnic in New Haven. When Shin began attending services there, he realized that all of these old connections were being triggered and popped off because, you know, there were these experiences that were resurfacing that he'd even forgotten about. And so part of the work of entering into and contributing to and building that multi-ethnic space for him and moving towards justice in solidarity with others was making sure he was solid, making sure that through therapy and prayer, meditation, counsel, and conversation, he went back and he unearthed this trauma and he said, how do I feel about being Korean American? How do I feel about Black folks? How do I feel about, you know, being made fun of for an accent, being made fun of for a name, being made fun of for how my parents talk? And he's shared with me that the more that he saw the love of God for him in his context, in his past self, all of his past selves, the more that he was able in his present self to move into these spaces, not out of fear, not out of a need to appeal to another or need to prove himself and validate himself to another, but out of an overflowing. So I believe that's my time. I went at very length on that point. I hope it spoke to some of y'all.
No, that was
but I know we got some Q's and A's.
Yeah, that was so great. And I feel like so much that I didn't anticipate, but so true of like, we can't be out marching and doing the work of justice if we haven't done that work within ourselves first, and the significance of taking care of that first, and the significance of like, in order to bear fruit, we have to have worked through those things. And so you pointed to so many beautiful things in the most poetic way I've ever heard possible in less than 15 minutes. So thank you so much, Jason, for joining us this evening. We have a couple of questions. I see 3 so far on my speaker's notes. So the first question is for Dr. Michelle Reyes. It says, I'm reading The Loneliest Americans. They listed what that book is about. But they asked, do Asian Americans, along with distinct languages, settlement histories, and points of fame, constitute a meaningful political category with shared policy views?
Unmute. Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. I think what is a helpful starting point, again, is to know the history of where the term Asian American comes from. The term was actually coined by activists from, oh goodness, I think they were grad students from Berkeley.
Yeah.
You know, activists Yuji Ichioka and Emma Gee in 1968. And it's a term that was created originally to encompass a social and political identity in the midst of having all of these different disparate Asian immigrants in the US, and all experiencing different forms of racism, microaggressions, racial profiling, and the rest, to say, okay, how do we band us all together to pursue Asian civil rights? And also it was created to intentionally reject the term Oriental that was being used in the 60s to describe Asian peoples. And so on. And so I think it's important. So for myself, for example, when I'm talking about my own personal story, and I think for all of us, when we're talking about our own lives and experiences and the stories of the people around us, to be as hyper local and hyper specific as possible. You know, I call myself a second generation bicultural Indian American woman, you know, but when I'm putting on my activist hat, when I'm putting on my sort of like political engagement hat in the community, I take on the term Asian American because it's my verbal signifier that I am showing up in pursuit of cross-racial, cross-ethnic solidarity, and is part of this sort of pan-ethnic Asian identity that hadn't existed before. And so I say that in solidarity, but outside of that, no, I mean, Asian Americans, the Pan-Asian community, we range. I mean, we're around 23 million Asian Americans now in the country. We represent over 42 Asian countries, as well as the Asian diaspora. We range on the political scale from conservative to progressive. Interestingly, a lot of Indians and Vietnamese vote more conservative, whereas other Asians, you know, perhaps vote more progressive. The past few elections have shown Asians all over the map on who they're voting for in terms of candidates, the sort of social issues that they're passionate about. And so I would say that in many ways, like there's more things that differentiate us than we hold in common. But I think by unifying and rallying around the term Asian Americans to say, despite our differences, politically, theologically, socioeconomically, even, that we're going to stand in solidarity with each other. And I think we've seen that in beautiful ways during the pandemic, that even though Asian hate related to the pandemic began against Chinese Americans, it did eventually trickle across the board. And by taking on the mantle of Asian Americans, say, no matter who is being treated and misaligned because of anti-Asian hate, we're going to link arms together and fight against it communally.
Yeah, so good. Well, and I think so much of what you talked about, history is so important. The Making of Asian America by Dr. Aacc Lee is a phenomenal book.
Yes.
It's textbook size. I was a PAC fellow in 2020, 21, and so much of learning I had no idea was this historical learning. I'm going to plug the Asian American Civil Rights Tour that we go on. We make a stop in Berkeley and we talk about the significance of what it meant to name Asian American, and like, why do we have to have ethnic studies when our history is a part of American history? And so many times we often see like the dynamic of like American is not synonymous with white, and like steering and moving away from that. But the history of these cultures, of the Page Act of 1875 was one of the first immigration acts that we had against women before we had any other immigration acts. Or like Filipinos were some of the first settlers here and were Filipino sailors in 1856. And so there's so much history that we haven't had the opportunity to learn or know because they weren't taught in the textbooks in high school or middle school or whatever it is. So the significance of, you know, our history is so important and it's so dynamic. And even within LA County, you know, we have 300 plus Asian dialects in LA County alone, and over 70 different Asian races. So like a lot of, I think what you're talking about is the significance of like, we're not a monolith and it is very diverse. And like Asians are the top earners of a minority, but also the most impoverished as well when you look at other immigrant cultures like those from Laos or parts of Cambodia, and significance of those dynamics. But thank you so much, Dr. Reyes, for answering that question. We have time for one more question, and feel free to follow everyone on social media. We've posted their information in the chat, but our last question is for Nam An, if she is still with us. But someone had asked your comment regarding your name and the use of it in education. Would you suggest that educators ask questions if they want to be called by their given name? Oftentimes students use American names because they think that their names are too difficult for English speakers to pronounce. How can teachers honor the given names of our students?
That's a tough one. I think a posture and a desire to show a shown effort that you actually do want to know the student's name and their given name, which seems very generic, right? Like, make some effort. But I know that as I began to tell more people about my name, I've had more people reach out to me and actually begin to share the story of their name and the importance of their name. And when there is a pride connected with your name, I think creating a relationship where teachers can build trust with their student, to even allow them to have the space that whenever you are comfortable for us to refer you by your given name, we will. But there isn't a pressure, there isn't a force. And again, it's like tenderly holding that baby, right? Because like students with unique names, immigrant students like myself, whether or not we were able to communicate with our name is, it still could have been an experience where she at least tried to shoot your shot for on is a bold shot. And there was never an invitation after that to even engage further. And so I wish there was a simple answer to that question, but I think so much of it has to do with an intentional effort to learn and create a space in your classroom where it is actually safe for a child to feel as if they can share what their name is without being mocked. Because oftentimes, and I think we give this excuse too often, that kids can be cruel. We have to examine where they learned that cruelty and to not make an excuse for it and to essentially face that head on. So I think more of a question, if you are a teacher in this space, is your classroom truly a space where kids feel safe to share their name and to expect that their name and their personhood would be treated with dignity, integrity, and honor? And if your answer is no, then I think there are bigger questions at play. But if you show an effort and you build trust, I believe that is the first steps the steps in the positive direction for students.
Yeah, thank you so much, Naman, for answering that question. And I think just a heart posture of being inquisitive, of asking. You've shared this in our table talks before of like, what does it look like to fall forward? So to step forward, even a mistake, or if you mispronounce something, it's far better to make that fall forward versus staying in silence, and the significance of that. So thank you so much. We have one more question. I know that we're at time, so if you are able to stick on with us, that would be great. And maybe I'll kind of open this up. This was directed at Pastor Michael, but I'll kind of open it up briefly because we only have a couple of minutes. But is taking up environmental stewardship / justice a particularly heavy lift for Asian American Christians, even in the Pacific Northwest? And if so, why? And so Pastor Michael, you want to briefly answer that? I'll say it is a heavy lift. I think that's why we're here. The lift of justice work is so significant, but there's so many dynamics and historical dynamics at play. And as Jason said, we have to work through our own stuff as we do that work as well. And stuff does come up that we weren't anticipating, kind of like An had shared. But Pastor Michael, do you want to briefly speak on that?
Yeah. So I think the heavy lift has not been environmental justice, because that's actually fairly new to our church. The issues that we have lost people on is racial justice and gender justice, right? And so I think in regards to racial justice, it kind of started when, my church folks were surprised that their pastor was at a Black Lives Matter rally, right? That's where it kind of started. And then like, okay, this is not normal, at least in their experience. And then soon thereafter, we started a racial justice ministry. I had John Williams come. This was when everything was by Zoom. And now here's a Black man on the screen at All Nations, at One Nation Community Church, right? And so there was this upheaval, and we started losing some people. But I call that addition by subtraction. sometimes you have to lose certain people with certain cultural history.
Pruning, I think is what they call it in the Bible.
Yeah. But I would say racial justice was one, and then also gender justice. We were in egalitarian church now, having women preachers, women fully acknowledged as equally called and gifted as men. And so because of that, we lost some people. And so I would say those two are the two areas that were the heaviest for our church people to lift.
Thank you so much. So as we close out this evening, thank you so much to each of our guest speakers. We are so thankful to have had them in the space. I hope that you learned so much and are following them on social media now. But just thank you so much to Michael, Michelle, Jason, and Nam-An for joining us this evening. Thank you from the Center for Racial Reconciliation. It is still AAPI Heritage Month. So we would love for you to participate. We have a 2.0 workshop coming up with the center. If you've already been through 1.0 or 2.0 is this month. But then May 21st, we have the Asian American community hosted by the Asian American Collective Group. We have a community picnic at Harambe in Pasadena from 12 to 2 p.m. May 21st in Pasadena. We will have food trucks and food. You can also bring your own lunch. Come hang out. We will have lawn games and all sorts of things, but you need to RSVP because we want to make sure we have enough food vendors and enough items for everyone attending. So that has been dropped in the chat. And then also I'm going to give a huge plug is we have the Asian American Civil Rights Tour. They are still accepting applications. You can email Hannah Belk directly. I know Jason will be hanging out with us in LA for a portion of that trip, but it is July 30th through August 6th. And let me tell you, as a mixed Asian American woman going on that trip in 2019, it really allowed me to learn and reclaim what it means to be an Asian American woman and to reclaim what it means to be Asian and to grow up and to begin to do this work and to find my voice in those spaces. And so I highly encourage, we fly into San Francisco, Oakland area, and then we take a bus all the way down, stop in Berkeley and in Yosemite at Manzanar, and then we spend a couple of days in LA learning. Joe Coy's new movie comes out that week, so I'm trying to see if we can do a movie showing for Joe Coy's new movie because it comes out at the end of the trip. So, but so excited, and thank you everyone so much for joining in this space. And we hope that you will be joining us for other events that we have. And then if you are Asian American, we have the AAPI Collective that has launched with the center. You can email Hannah .belk@madeforfellowship.com to sign up for that. But we meet on the first Wednesday of every month on Zoom. And so we just want to create a safe space to have conversation, to grow in the community, and hoping that that spurs on to more things like book clubs and foodie outings. Because let me tell you, Asians have some of the best food at their potlucks. So looking forward to all the future events that we'll have. But again, thank you so much to everyone who joined us this evening, or those even who maybe are watching later online. And thank you again to Michael, Michelle, Jason, and Nam-An. And we love you guys so much. And thank you from the center. Have a good night.